What is the worst arc for each of the Straw Hats? Well, today I'm going to give my opinion on that, although I believe that in this case, a video like this is even more subjective than evaluating the best arc of each Straw Hat. I really believe that if you asked me which is the best arc for Sanji, everyone could quickly respond with a specific arc, and each would have their own opinion. But if you ask me the opposite question, it becomes much more complicated to answer, or at least for me to decide. I had to go through each of the arcs because at first, none of them stood out to me for most of the Straw Hats. However, I've made my decision, and that's why I want to discuss this topic with you. But it's also important that you leave your opinion in the comments, because I believe that a video like this can generate a lot of debate, a healthy debate. Let's start with Usopp. For me, his worst arc is the drum arc. I just read this arc, it's still fresh in my mind, and without a doubt, Usopp's role here was fun, it had something important, but he didn't do much else. Basically, he spent the whole arc following Vivi, drinking hot chocolate, and that was it. The interesting thing I mentioned is that without a doubt, this arc made the character more known and gave us one of the most important scenes for Usopp's development. It's not that the reader notices this during the arc, but upon rereading the story, you realize that the insecurities that would later lead him to confront Luffy start here in the drum arc. I say this because on a first read, many people don't even notice it. You need to reread to realize, here is where Usopp's insecurities begin. This was the first time we saw his feelings. It was here that he started to feel useless within the crew. And why did he feel this way? Well, I'll develop this further in the analysis, but in short, Usopp didn't do anything in this arc compared to the other Straw Hats, and he himself realized this and began to feel smaller. So for me, this is still the worst arc of Usopp. Now let's talk about Nami. I think we all know very well what her worst arc is, and it's the Bharati arc. If anyone had any doubt about this, I'd be surprised. In fact, Nami doesn't really have any bad arcs in general, except for this one, and this could be debated. I don't remember any arc right now where I think Nami did nothing. On the contrary, I think she always has her moments of protagonism. However, the Bharati was that arc, and I don't think I need to justify it too much. Bharati is her worst arc because she betrays the crew, period. There's nothing more to say. During the battle against Don Krieg, Nami steals the Going Merry and abandons her crewmates, leaving them without a ship again. Yes, Nami didn't do this out of malice. She did it to save her village from Arlong, but I'm evaluating the arcs individually. And without a doubt, when I saw this betrayal for the first time, and no one can tell me otherwise, I, like everyone else, hated Nami. This moment was crucial for the development of the character, as her loyalty was reaffirmed later when she asked for Luffy's help. But in Bharati, her participation in this arc is the worst. To be objective, this is without a doubt her worst arc. And please don't tell me otherwise. With Chopper, something interesting happens. His worst arc, for me, is the return to Sabaody. What did he do there? Nothing. He simply confused the Straw Hats with fake Straw Hats. Congratulations, Chopper. Joking aside, I think it's unfair to evaluate a 4 or 5 chapter arc as the worst of his history. What I know is that his worst arc should be one from the post-time skip, because I think I might be wrong now, but after the time skip, he didn't have a decent fight, at least in Skypiea, which many people consider one of the worst arcs, and I don't agree. Chopper defeated one of Enel's priests, and we must remember that Chopper is the crew's doctor, and his role isn't too focused on battles. So after thinking a lot, I think his worst arc, at least the one where he had the least protagonism, was Dressrosa. In this arc, Chopper had a very small role in the plot, and he mostly stayed on the Sunny. Considering what Dressrosa meant, since the plot of One Piece grew a lot there, Chopper didn't do anything. Or are you going to tell me that Chopper did something important? Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I don't think so. So for me, this arc is the one where the character had the least importance and participated the least. Let's talk about Brook. The truth is that since his first appearance in Thriller Bark, Brook has never had a bad arc, at least not for me. Let me justify. He always fulfilled what is expected of the character. He brings humor, emotional moments sometimes, and plays his role in battles when necessary. However, after Whole Cake, where he had his first big moment, his role became more secondary, and I think the Egghead arc is a clear example of that. Brook was the character who stood out the least among all the Straw Hats. Literally, he didn't have any important moments. His participation was extremely discreet compared to the previous arcs. It might be compared to his role in Sabaody, but that arc was very short. Plus, considering the consequences of the arc and its conclusion, it would be unfair to evaluate it as Brook's worst arc. In short, for me, Egghead was the arc where the least spotlight was on the Straw Hat. Even though the plot was sufficiently extensive, I believe this is Brook's worst arc. Well, without a doubt, Robin's worst arc is all those in which she reads a poneglyph and doesn't tell us anything. Well, that's a joke, but at the same time it's not, because the day she starts talking, we'll live again what happened in the last few months. months with Vegapunk's message. She'll start speaking, and we'll have chapters and weeks talking about the poneglyphs, and for me, Robin's worst arc is definitely Dressrosa, just like Chopper's. Although it wasn't especially bad, compared to other arcs where her participation was important, it was here that she became the most irrelevant, at least in my opinion. While most of the other Straw Hats had amazing battles during the arc, Robin played more of a supporting role. In Dressrosa, there were enough opportunities for Robin to shine more than she did, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. She ended up taking care of Rebecca, and this was a major complaint from the community for years. With everything we saw Robin do in her first appearances, the more the arcs went by, the more irrelevant she became, reaching her lowest point here in Dressrosa. Yes, her role may not be to be the strongest in the crew, but to be the voice that tells the truth to the world. But every now and then, I think Robin needs more protagonism than she had, especially in an arc like Dressrosa where there wasn't a poneglyph involved. Now, let's talk about Franky. Since Dressrosa, it's clear that Franky lost a bit of protagonism, but for me, he never had an arc that was so bad that it would be classified as his worst arc. His participation was constant, although maybe not as striking as the other Straw Hats, but his role was never to stand out so much. For example, in Wano, everyone expected more from Franky, but still, he had his interesting moments. Since his confrontation with Big Mom, his fight against Sasaki, and even his work in building the ships that would take the Alliance to Onigashima. Really, we don't have much to complain about him. Franky fulfilled his role perfectly. It wasn't the best arc for him, obviously, but he remained relevant. However, I have to pick his worst arc, so I'll make a decision. And maybe this is unfair because it's a very short arc, but I'll say Sabaody. The truth is, I didn't find another arc. His main mission was to protect the Sunny, and no, he didn't fulfill this function. Yes, this is completely justified, since Kuma had other plans for the crew and didn't let them stay on the island. Otherwise, they would be captured by Kizaru. But anyway, for me, among all the arcs he participated in, this might be the worst, although I repeat that it's unfair. Now let's talk about Jinbe, who for me had his worst arc, but I don't think it was disappointing. In fact, it's normal for Oda to give him a more secondary role in this case. This time, Jinbe simply wasn't in the focus he had in other moments. He participated in few arcs since his introduction, and in each of them he had considerable protagonism, whether in Marineford or Whole Cake, but in all, he had an important role. So, it's normal for Oda to have chosen to leave him in the background this time. You can't expect every character to always be at the center of the action, and in this particular arc, the plot was more focused on other themes. So without a doubt, Jinbe's worst arc so far was the last one in Egghead. And let's finally talk about one of the worst arcs, or rather, one of the worst participations of a Straw Hat. Who could doubt what the worst arc for Sanji is? No one, okay? What on earth was Oda thinking to ruin a character's arc like that? Seriously, there was no better way to justify that on Fishman Island. There can't be blood transfusions between humans and fishmen. I honestly think Oda had fun making these scenes of Sanji bleeding on every page. But really, did anyone find this funny, besides the third time Sanji bled? It's a joke. A damn joke from Oda that almost killed a Straw Hat. I'm one of those people who usually doesn't mind Sanji's perverted moments, because for me, it's just a joke. It can be more or less funny, but it doesn't bother me. But in this arc on Fishman Island, this joke wasn't funny. An entire arc based on the idea that Sanji suffered a serious nosebleed and needed a blood transfusion was one of the few moments I really wanted to skip the Straw Hat scenes. Also, do you remember when he says he finally found his all blue with the mermaids? Well, nothing makes sense, and I don't think anyone can defend this as Sanji's worst arc. Let's talk now about Zoro. For me, saying which is Zoro's worst arc is quite difficult. With characters like Luffy or Sanji, I'm more certain, but with Zoro, there hasn't been an arc as bad as those two, at least in my opinion. Many of you have told me several times that Punk Hazard was one of his worst arcs, but I don't agree. This arc has good moments for the Straw Hats, like when he cuts the Harpy in half, which also has a great significance in his relationship with Tashigi, or the words he says to Luffy about the fact that they are now in the New World, which yes, later he didn't quite fulfill perfectly. But well, those are good moments, of course. There were also some bad parts in this arc, but overall, I don't think this was at all his worst arc. After thinking a lot, I think Zoro's worst arc could have been the Drum arc or Syrup Village, arcs where Zoro was more absent and his participation was quite discreet compared to others. I know some of you might think his worst arc was Wano, due to the character's huge potential there, but I think in this case, the problem wasn't Zoro, but our expectations, or how the Wano arc itself was developed. And finally, let's talk about Luffy, whose worst arc is definitely Whiskey Peak, and I think there are several reasons for that. In this arc, Luffy doesn't act like he normally would. For me, the fight he has against Zoro is completely illogical, and even more so because it's preceded by Luffy's trust in the bounty hunters of the city just because they offered food. In my opinion, this was a comedy that Oda tried to make, and it ended up getting out of control, just like what happened with Sanji on Fishman Island. Because once again, I don't think it's funny. I think it's a joke that isn't funny to anyone. You're ruining a character who always defends defended the idea of protecting his own, even if he had to sacrifice his life. Besides, in this arc, who really did something important was Nami and Zoro, while Luffy spent most of the time eating and not really contributing to the plot. So for me, this is his worst arc, and I believe most of you will agree with me, if not all. And that's all for today, pirates. I hope you really liked this video. I want to read your opinions in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Leave a like, and there's not much more to say. Thank you so much for everything, and until next time, bye.